Name is Jason Luttrell. I'm here with Shakiba, Felicia Shakiba from CPO Playbook. She is running around developing organizational leadership plans for emerging brands and companies that are ready to scale. Felicia, thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, tell me about your company.
Yeah, so CPO Playbook is a leadership and human capital consultancy, and we do executive coaching and anything around leadership development and human capital. And human capital is kind of a soft, vague word, but we do anything from succession planning, training, um, HR analytics, people analytics, design, compensation, total rewards planning. So you name it, we're there for really how you scale companies is being able to do all of those things. They're very complex, but it's a lot of fun.
Can you tell me about some of the work that you've done with restaurants and some of the challenges that they face that you've helped them with?
Yeah. So, gosh, there's a few I could talk about, but I think one in particular that stands out, which was really interesting, which was Portillo's. So Portillo's, they're a chain in a sandwich chain in Chicago, and shout out to all my Chi-Town friends. I used to live in Chicago, so I have a soft spot. But one of the things that was really interesting for them is that they were growing and scaling, and they were hiring a lot of like managers, obviously outside of the organization. So they were bringing in new people who had been part of different cultures and different organizations and different restaurants, right? And they weren't really getting the results that they needed, that they were looking for. And so when they did a lot of digging into, understanding, well, what is this employee experience, and like identifying which places and locations weren't doing as well, what they realized was they weren't really bringing in those who maybe they were like great managers, but they weren't really part of that culture. And there was this like separation, right? So, how do you actually make sure that those managers are living and breathing the Portillo's culture, which is really what makes the restaurant and the guest experience and the employee experience thrive? So what they did was they actually designed a internal like emerging leaders program, where if you wanted to be a leader, they wanted to grow those leaders from within. And this was absolute genius, because not only were they identifying candidates from within the organization and who already had the culture and the integrity and the like mission integrity and that relationship with customers, but they were growing them within and actually teaching them the exact hands-on soft and hard skills that were needed in order to be a manager. And so they were doing their customers a favor, they were doing themselves a favor, they were doing their employees a favor, and they found wildly successful results by doing this, because they were actually growing. Like they designed this succession planning for these emerging leaders to grow into those that actually had careers long term within the business. So they improved their retention as well. It was just all around a really great success. And I'm really proud of that, for them. They did a great job.
What are some of the things that you look for in leadership that you either train or recruit for?
Yes, such a great question. So I think that there's some standards, right, around leadership and experiences in specific locations. I think, for example, leadership means something different to different organizations, different industries, and between different organizations that are in the same industry, right? So I think what's really important is that when you're looking for leadership, it should fit. You shouldn't try to fit a round peg into a square hole, right? It's really about understanding what is the shape that you have, and then what are we missing, and what do we need? What does the organization need? So having a really deep understanding of what that looks like for that unique business is really key and what's important. But overall, I think what is also very critical is that a leader should really understand who their stakeholders are. And by that, I mean, you know, sometimes we get leaders who manage up, like to the board or to the executive team or regionals and so forth. But what's important is that there are multiple stakeholders, right? There's the board, or there's your executive, the owner, the manager, but there's also the servers, there's also the cooks, there's also the chef, and absolutely the guests. And so, and your community. I'm sorry, how could I forget the community, right, of the restaurant? And so, I think that a leader in this type of business is really it's really critical for them to understand who their stakeholders are. It's not just one type of stakeholder, and if they're understanding all of the needs of their stakeholder, they're better able to serve them. And I think that that's something that I would look for in leadership in a hospitality environment.
A lot of clients that I've worked with are have a difficult time articulating what it is that they do. Like they can tell you everything about the menu, they can tell you everything about the drinks, but they can't talk very much about who their company is, what they stand for, what they stand against. Do you help them kind of articulate these kind of pillar elements of their business so they can so everybody can march to the same beat, like so everybody's marching in lockstep?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, that's really part of the culture, and leadership. Sometimes leaders believe that, oh, like managers drive the culture or HR drives the culture, or, but really the leaders at the top are those, even when they're not purposefully driving culture, they are always driving culture based on their behaviors. Like, you have a spotlight on you at all times, with the guests, with your employees, and with prospective guests that are going to later dine in your restaurant. And so, part of like what's important in what we do is that we help leaders and support them. And how do you actually show up to drive culture? And it has to do with truly understanding the definition, those values, and then being able to demonstrate and behave in accordance with those values, right? So sometimes I see, like, and actually in any organization, sometimes I see leaders say, "This is what we need to do," and then they turn around and say, "Well, you need to do it, not me." And
Hmm.
that is a really bad that's like a true break in
Mhm.
culture. And so, it's really, really critical for those things to be not just observed, but experienced, and not just by, your staff, but also with the guests, right? So I think that ultimately what leaders, and I guess in my experience, but I'm sure there's many definitions, but I would say that the leader's job is to, really make a fantastic, memorable guest experience, and ensure that the staff is capable and have the tools and the environment in order to ensure and confirm that that's happening for your guests.
Okay, so the number one, I mean, one of the biggest complaints I get from clients and just from the industry in general is that a good team is hard to find, and the churn rate is astronomical, especially in bars and restaurants, hospitality in general. That is largely attributed to that is largely attributed to lack of training and clear direction. So, how would you
Yeah.
structure a new employee plan? Like, let's say at a Portello's. Like, was there like a 100-day process, or how does that work?
Yeah, so it's a little different at every location, but if something like as big as Portillo's, um, I think onboarding is absolutely critical. It's like in any type of new experience, whether it be executive or a new employee or a waiter or a cook or whatnot, the first 100 days, and maybe even the most critical is like day one or even pre-day one, really sets up that individual for success. And so, what does that look like and what does that mean? A lot of times I think day one is about, well, let's give you a tour, let's have you meet some people, let's um, show you where the menus are, let's have you sit down and like memorize the menu, let's have you try some things. But those are all very important. But I think, again, I go back to like the culture, right? It's like What are the values? Okay, what's the definition of those values? What does it look like? What does it feel like? And what's the most important is that a new individual to a restaurant, I would say that it's not about what they're hearing, it's about what they're observing and what they're experiencing is really setting the tone for the rest of their time there, right? I'll give you actually a personal example. So when I was, I think 15, I'm going way back. I like one of my first jobs was working at Coffee Bean. So I was a big Coffee Bean fan. And, day one, I was like given a manual. I had like my onboarding um, binder and I was going through each day of like, how to make a drink and then a little bit later on, I was a little bit unhappy about just, you know, I think like my manager and it was always like him coming out and saying stock the fridge or something like that. And for me I was just like, you know what, I'm not thrilled about the culture here. And at that point I didn't even know really what culture meant, but I really enjoyed making drinks at the bar. And so I said, okay, well, let's try Starbucks. So I went to Starbucks and it was, I kid you not, it was night and day difference. Um, my experience from, and these are the same, these are, exact same type of services. This is a coffee bar. Um, Starbucks started with the guest experience. They started explaining to me that the guests come first, period, no matter what. And what does that mean? What does that look like? Well, if there's somebody waiting in line, you want to address them first before you stock the fridge or you clean something, right? You want to make sure that they are taken care of. If you see that there's an area that needs to be cleaned, then that's you complete your new guest drink, and then you make sure that the environment is spick and span and making sure that people feel comfortable. They wanted people to have an experience. It was, I mean, don't get me wrong, like it was about the food, obviously, and the quality of what they're serving. But it was like, 80% guest experience and like 20%, food and beverage. And that was like flipped at a Coffee Bean, right? So I think just from my own personal experience, it was a beautiful example that made me truly realize the power and I think just like the essence and the embodiment of like what does culture look like in very similar environments. And so I think maybe just like long story short to your question, I think that you really need to lean into what does the guest experience look like as the top of the chart, right? And then be able to work your way backwards into understanding, well, what does that look like for bartenders or waiters, waitresses, servers? And then what does that look like in the kitchen? And then what does that look like at management? And what does that look like from the hostess point of view, right? So it's really all funneling into we're here for one goal, which is giving the guest an incredible experience. And it has to go both ways, right? From the guest all the way to leadership and vice versa. And aligning all of those pieces is the challenge, right? It's making sure that everybody knows we're all on the same page. And in order to do that, there's continuous learning, right? I think if you're not continuously learning and understanding how do we make things better, how do we make things more aligned for the guest, how do we improve improve the food or the beverages, and so forth. It's really about making sure that you're continuously upping your game and making that experience the best you can be.
Easier said than done. How do you do that? How do you document and iterate?
Yeah, that's exactly what we do. So it's challenging, obviously, but very doable. And so it starts with what is the vision that leadership has for the guest,
Give me an
and it
example. Give me an
yeah.
example of how you would say of how you'd get everybody in alignment on the mission.
Yeah. So I think first and foremost, we work with the leaders to ensure that they're aligned. And that's again easier said than done. So actionable items is, about making sure we first speak to, the top of the chain, right? Who is the owner of the restaurant, and make sure we understand his or her vision and what that looks like. And then we bring in the next layer of management and say, okay, I might, for example, have one-on-one conversations and collect this qualitative data to say, well, what's your vision and what's your vision? That will help me identify, are they aligned? Are they a little bit separate? And where's the gap? Once we understand where that gap is and what that vision is very clearly, we ask them and we observe a little bit more data. So it's a lot of data collection up front to truly understand what's happening in the restaurant. And once we maybe talk to a server or maybe talk to the hostess or the chef, we'll collect that data again and look for those gaps. But we really want to start again back with the leadership team, and that could just be, a few people, two, three people in a restaurant, depending how big it is, or small. But that is really where we say, do we want to keep this mission and vision? Is it clear? Or do we need to refresh it? Because sometimes that's not being refreshed, as much as you need it to be. And so we align on language. What is the language? So once we have that locked in, then we're able to say, okay, what does this look like? What are the behaviors? And maybe an example is like, okay, we want to make sure that guests feel welcomed when they enter the restaurant, even if we don't have a table ready for them. So that might be, okay, we want to make sure that the hostess or host, says hello, or maybe it's them walking to the guest or holding the door open for them, or creating a beautiful ambiance. Like, what does it actually look like to them? And then when we have some clarity on what that looks like, then we're able to say, okay, how do we do this consistently? How do we maybe do it once as a pilot and say, this is something we need to work on? And there's a constant communication, right? So if something slips, why does it slip? Do we have a mechanism for feedback? Do we have continuous, communication from anyone anywhere from the leadership to the server to the host to the kitchen? How do we give each other feedback so we can improve every single night, every week? Do we have times where we come together and hash out, hey, these are the things that we want to improve, here are the things that's going well? So it really has to do a lot with communication and making sure that people have a common language of understanding what does it look like and how do we behave in order to uphold the values and the experience that we want for the guests. I mean, once we have that down, then we could take it another step further and do a data exercise, which is how do we make sure that we're getting the right progress that we want? And that has to do with, sometimes it's, asking our customers to say, hey, we'll give you a free meal or 50% off if you answer the survey. And we want that data, right? We want to be able to say, okay, we gave our guests a survey in the beginning of the year. Now we maybe want to do it in next quarter or in, the half of the year. And we want to see, did any of the communication or actions that took place actually improve the guest experience? And that's how we really align data decisions to understanding if what we're doing is working or if we need a little bit more time.
Where does the rubber meet the road between your advice and people actually doing stuff? Like, how do you get people to actually do stuff that you tell them to do?
There's a relationship that needs to be had. I mean, you're any type of leader should truly understand that they're an influencer. And by that, I mean, there are some moments with some individuals, some types of situations where people want to be told what to do. They want to just say, hey, just tell me what you need from me and I will do it. And that's called situational leadership. It's understanding what that individual needs in the moment. But ultimately, that leader should be an influencer. And how do you influence? Well, there's multiple strategies of persuasion and influence, but at the end of the day, it's about having a good relationship. If you are, an owner or a manager that is constantly just pointing your finger and showcasing what's wrong, I mean, there's not a good, strong relationship that you're going to get out of someone, and they're most likely going to leave. I mean, that is eventually what happens. And so, if you want to get people to do what you want them to do, it's understanding their needs, have empathy. Like if there's someone cleaning tables, it's like, understanding, hey, I didn't see, that table cleaned on time. Can you tell me more about, why it wasn't cleaned quickly? Maybe that person was like, oh, I have too many tables. Or maybe that person said, I was helping a guest, walk out because they were in a wheelchair. Or maybe, maybe it was, or maybe I didn't have the tools that I need. So having true empathy and understanding and like being curious about how can you help that person versus how do you know make sure that person does what they need to do. I just don't think that's the right approach. It's really
Mm.
about how can I make you better, how can I help you, how can I support you. I mean, that's truly what servant leadership looks like, and I find that that type of leadership is the more successful than
Mhm.
the pointing the finger and you know getting frustrated. I mean, not that
Yeah.
you can't be frustrated. Leaders absolutely, they have a absolute right to be frustrated, and they will be, and that is the nature of the job. But at the end of the day, if you want me to answer the question, which is how do you get people to do what you want them to do, it's making sure you have a strong relationship. Like they should want to serve you back, right? They should want to be able to support you as a leader, and that is where you get that loyalty and that commitment from those who are working with you.
Yeah, agree 100%. So can you talk a little bit about the tools that you use? Like you talk about data and asking people questions. Do you use like traditional surveys like NPS and Q12, or are you using something more customized, something a little bit more dynamic, like your background?
Yeah.
You're
Yes.
you're very slick back. Your very slick website is stunning, by the way.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm sure there's so much more we could do with it, but I really do appreciate that. So great question. There are survey tools out there that you can use that are on the fly. We actually design and customize our own um, for any type of if the company has multiple locations, multiple entities, we have something called PIA 360. So PIA 360 is a portfolio intelligence assessment. It's not necessarily a survey for engagement or customers or clients, but it is a way to measure leadership and culture the way you might measure your financials. So we're very excited about that tool. But because we've been able to create and design our own tools, we can customize that for really any organization. My background as an industrial organizational psychologist, it's kind of my forte. And so I really like to see custom tools because they measure what you're looking to measure. They're not just these giant surveys that um, provide a lot of distraction for what you may be doing, the things that you don't need to be doing. And like, again, a Michelin star restaurant is going to be very different from, a quick service restaurant. So I think you don't want the same survey, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
You want a different experience, right? You want to be able to customize and have items on your survey that reflect your values and your mission. So that's what we kind of specialize. I would suggest that, but if you don't have anything, I think something is better than nothing.
Speaking of tools and stuff, have you experimented with implementing AI solutions with your consulting, with your coaching?
Yeah, yeah. So yes, it's a balance. We don't like having AI make any of our decisions, but we do sometimes collect a lot of qualitative data, and the quantitative data and the analytics we leverage a little bit there. But as far as where we really see the value, it has to do with all the interviews that I had talked about earlier, which is understanding an interview from a chef or a waiter or an owner. Putting all of that together, and we often collect a lot. So sifting through and finding those themes is really helpful when you're leveraging AI. At least for us, for right now, that might change later. But it's definitely been able to make us more efficient without, without keeping us from hitting our goals and what we want to do with our services, and making sure we get the right answers.
Okay, I got one more for you.
Yeah.
If you were a restaurant owner that had 5 restaurants that was looking to make it 500 restaurants, what advice would you give them to organize their business to set them up for scale?
Okay, first thing I would do is make sure there's consistency around culture and leadership and efficiencies with all the five first that I have. So that would be step one, is making sure that the first five are consistent. Because if you can get five consistent, um, and that, what does that mean? That means making sure that leaders, maybe even they come together, right? So the leaders of those five restaurants might come together and have a consistent feedback. So they're actually talking about what they're seeing in different restaurants, and also what makes them unique in their own location. So that's truly critical, because then you can understand, well, if I open a new restaurant in a different location, anywhere else, here's what I know, what I want to be consistent. Here's what I know that I want to be, to have like local decision making based on the community, and maybe like the menu based on like where they're located, right? So I think that that's what would be my first step, is making sure you get consistency across leadership, implementation, and efficiencies. um, and then obviously, like when you're growing like that, I think that it does make sense to look at technology. Technology is leveraged to scale. It's not leveraged to like really create pilots or like one-offs. But once you understand what you're trying to accomplish, and the form and the actions, and the operations that you want to implement, technology is a great way to help scale what that looks like. So it could be, we want to make sure that all of our staff, our servers want to truly communicate, or provide a guest experience that align with the values of our business. And let's say the values of our business is like ensuring that the kids that come in have a wonderful experience. And so maybe it's really about having some technology that's mobile, that servers can watch a brief like a brief video of some sort that talks about what this looks like, to kind of showcase what that looks like. So that's something that I would leverage around. Okay, we have a true consistency about what we want the server to truly understand about the guest experience, and we want to maybe create some sort of the technology in order to serve them on the fly, right? It's not going to be on a laptop, it may be on the mobile. So we would think through when to deliver it, how often to deliver it, who would create that video. Would we have leadership involved in that video, which is also a very great idea,
Mhm.
because it's really looking at leadership, and leadership transparency is really important, but that's a whole nother episode. Um, so with that being said, I think those are the types of things that I would do. So making sure I understand what's consistent, bringing those leadership teams together to tease out what's consistent and what's local decision making look like, and then being able to come up with a plan of how do we leverage technology to scale to multiple other locations.
Amazing. All right, how do we find you on the internet?
CPO, yeah, cpoplaybook.com. You can definitely get in touch. I'm also on LinkedIn. I check my LinkedIn very often, so happy to say hi, and would love to hear your story and your guest story and see how I can be helpful.
Well, thank you so much for doing this, Dr. Felicia Shakiba. Is
Oh,
it doctor?
close. I mean, technically, I think the stuff that I do is very doctoral, but masters. So you can call me Felicia. That's fine.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Felicia Shakiba from the CPO Playbook. It's been really illuminating advice. If you haven't already signed up for my 14-day restaurant accelerator, it's 100% free. We will not let you down. And we have learning management systems in there that Felicia was talking about. Thank you so much. And we will see you next time.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And that was it.
All right.
So yeah, the live one is typically